Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, it is your favorite dark sorcerer here, Angelus, son of Abaddon, and tonight I'd like to discuss shamanism and herbalism. Now, I've been doing a lot of reading into herbalism and the various different traditions that are closely resembling that of necromancy world over. And I find it very, very interesting and intriguing that the term dark or black magician, sorcerer even, has been implemented into so many different traditions. Now, the anthropology of occult sorcery and witchcraft in the Amazonia, which is a book, by the way, and it is actually a title, is something that's very, very interesting because the name of that book is called Dark Shamans. Okay? The Canaima and Poetics of Violent Death by Neil L. Whitehead and Robin Wright. Okay? I had to write those two names down because they're kind of, you don't hear names like that very often. And I had to make sure I had that right because it was a interesting book. I ended up getting my hands on it in PDF format, and I started reading it. Now I knew dark shamanism has been practiced in both Siberia and that of Mongolia for hundreds of years. Okay, I knew that a lot of times you're speaking between the 19th century, like say 1974, going all the way back to 1961, just to name a couple of timetables of where books were actually written about it and how it can be dated back as far as the 16th century, especially in South America. But what's interesting is when you get into places like Mongolia or Siberia, which used to be part of Russia, I found it very intriguing, especially from a herbalist perspective. Namely because of the fact that dark shamanism is an ancient form which practiced, or I should say, which is practiced in Brazil, Venezuela, in the highlands of Guyana, which is the form of an ancient tradition known as the Canaima. Okay, now this particular style goes all the way back as far as the 13th century. 13th century. Very fascinating. I find that a lot of the old school traditions associated with folklore, for an example, tend to translate and go all the way back to around the 13th century and beyond. Yeah, I mean, you can get into the old school names of witchcraft and the practitioners, such as the Hexa, the Aji. Okay, the Aji is African. It's related to voodoo men and medicine men. Okay, whereas the Hexa can be both male and female. Later, around the 16th century, associated with the witch and the warlock from the Anglo-Saxon and Welsh traditions. Poleros can be both male and female. You can get into the Bruja or the Brujo in Santeria, Pero Mayambi, Quimbanda, umbra, and so forth type practices, getting into both the Hugan and the Mamba, the Bokor, if you wish, if you want to get into Wudan traditions. But when you get into the old school traditions of shamanism, necromancy, the one thing I've realized throughout my entire study, not just study, but also practice of necromancy, is how closely it resembles shamanism. As I've stated in other videos, the tools in the traditions are similar. The only thing that separates them is the intent behind it, the methods that are utilized and deployed. Okay? Now, I found it very interesting because it involves stalking, mutilation, lingering death, and consumption of human victims. This is old school. This is the dark aspects of shamanism. But you don't hear this from a lot of practitioners. Why? I mean, you consider there have been university studies just on this tradition. And the only difference between dark shamanism and black shamanism is how far back black shamanism actually goes. You see, dark shamanism can be traced back to the 16th century, but black shamanism, black shamanism is practiced both in Siberia and Mongolia. It has thrived through the Soviet occupation. The setting of Buddhism that was in place in the region. And black shamanism can be traced back to what's his name there? Genghis Khan. Okay, Genghis Khan. Okay, who is said to be the leader of a group known as the Dark Had. Okay, Dark Had. Now I'm not sure if I pronounced that right because it's you got the word dark and then you have HAD at the end. So in technical terms, it is Dark Had. Not sure why, but it's there. Okay. And the dark shamans, the black shamans, work with evil spirits. Okay. They are both they are perceived as working with evil spirits such as demons or jinn, even the Devi, if you wish, which is associated with Hinduism. In Hinduism, you actually have monks that practice Buddhism as well. So it's kind of interesting how all of these systems seem to have come across at one point or another with dark or black shamanism. And basically, this group was associated in defiance, much like modern day Satanism, for an example. I mean, Satanism takes root with the inverted pentagram, the horns pointed up, like so, thrusting up to pierce the veil of the heavens in defiance to say, basically, up yours. I am not living like a sheep, right? Well, if you think about it, dark shamanism or black shamanism is much like the Haitian Voodoo, the guerrillas and their tactics within the voodoo practices of terrorizing the French Quarter, or what can be classified as the French, because of the fact that they nailed rats to the door, the way they drank or consumed human blood, creating zombies through zombification, this zombie powder, utilizing herbs and poisons and venoms and gases. I'm talking things like the gallbladder from various different pufferfish. I'm talking things from like the venoms or the poisons of tree frogs and the gases of toads. And these are just the three main ingredients that are mixed in with voodoo powder. But what's ironic is everything else is unique to the practitioner. And when you get into shamanism, I mean, you're dealing with things like tobacco. You're dealing with things like hellebore, yarrow, Oriolander. You're dealing with hemlock. You're dealing with herbs that were known to bring delusions and even death. So yeah, I mean, to see the history of dark shamanism and black shamanism and how it's associated with necromancy, because even in necromancy, herbalism is used within certain oleums, certain brews, even. In demonology today, I mean, when you get into demonolatry or demonolators, okay, such as S. Connolly's book, the complete book of demonology or the complete book of demonology by S. Connolly, okay? Her book, Bringing Down Belial, for just to name one, brings about certain oleums and brews that are laced with things like plants, food colorings, certain types of foods, even things that you would normally find within a kitchen. Some of the best known authors of herbalism are like Scott Cunningham, Paul Huzon. These even Raymond Buckland gave at least 8 to 10 pages in the complete book of witchcraft just to the ancient tongue of herbalism within its Latin translations. So when you're thinking about shamanism, like voodoo and dark witchcraft, sorcery, this tradition, or traditions, I should say, because it comes down to what region of the world you're actually practicing this in. You're not just dealing with that of the light, but you're also dealing with the forces of darkness, or what is classified as evil. Okay? And I found it very interesting and intriguing in that sense because of you're always going to see that duality going back literally to the 13th century and beyond. But when you get back into the earlier years, like say the 6th century, you're especially in European countries, you're not seeing that duality. You're seeing practitioners that will either heal or kill, you know? And it's really fascinating even further because in certain regions, shamans were, unlike, say, the Boko or the Darak within Gaelic traditions. The shamans actually were given a choice. Okay, they actually had a choice to be either good or evil, to use their gifts for healing or destruction. It's kind of like Satanism if you think about it, especially in today's world. You see so many wanting to play the bad guy to the church, to stand in defiance. But how many people delve into history? How many of them delve into folklore, mythology, to get into the old wives' tales, even? to delve into the ancient world to see how these practices were actually done. Now, I mean, for an example, I mean, like I said, I named off a few little bits, tidbits of herbs. And yes, all of these herbs that I named off were actually considered poisons. Okay. And yes, they are poisonous, but it comes down to the method of use and how much of a quantity you actually utilize. Okay. One part, two part, depends on the plant. It's kind of like white snake or say, let's go with water hemlock. Certain things like ricin can be deadly, but it can also simply make you sick for days. You got to learn it. So I've been thinking about this new book that's coming out while I've been reading this current book that I've been reading, going through all the herbs, all the plants, getting into the various different traditions. So I started thinking about a book that started coming out that was recently published, pre-ordered even. And it was by Edgar Cavall and put forth by E.A. Coetti, which is based off baneful sorcery. Now, what was that title I gave at the beginning? Oh, right. The Anthropology of Assault Sorcery and Witchcraft. Think about that for just a minute. Just think about that. Think of all the political upheavals and assassinations that were waged worldwide. Poisons were utilized in Asia, India, toxins, venoms throughout Europe. The confines of these alchemical produced toxins, their shapes and their toxicities have been changed and varies depending on the type of potion. Because you got to remember that some of them can be made into a paste. Now, I'm reminded of a book by Nicholas Remy called Demonology, an ancient account of witchcraft. And I found this very interesting because in just chapter one, he admits through the witch's hammer that 3 known powders were found on convicted or accused witches. The first is a white powder. Now, the white powders were made to heal people, heal them. The amber colored powders were made to make somebody sick, ill, to mimic, say, the flu, perhaps food poisoning. And then you had the black powder. Now, the black powder has been used in assassinations in Asia. And anybody who gets an envelope full of black powder, well, guess what? You've been marked for death. But black powders, when mixed in with a paste, are in the same mannerism as those who handle venomous snakes. Think about this for just a minute. The more you're bit, the more of an immunity that you would build up to it, right? Witches were said to have this paste on their hands. So if they shook your hand and you were the target, you wouldn't know that you had been laced with this drug, this poison, this venom. So a day or two later, you begin to get ill as it enters your system through your pores and your skin. The stories and the accounts of this show that it attacks certain portions of the body, like neuromuscular, perhaps even cardiovascular, dealing and afflicting these systems. Some even appear to be an ascension, a form of ascension, where it ascending leg syndrome, where it literally goes up until it hits your cardiovascular and then you're dead. You see, the black powder was meant to kill you. It was always meant to destroy. It was a destructive agent. But think about it though. It could also be placed in liquid form. European countries were renowned for this, especially that of the French Quarter or that of English, because they would utilize this liquid, this little vial that they just simply pop off and just pour it in your food. Now, hemlock was notorious for this because of the fact that it's not only odorless, but it's also tasteless. You won't even know that it was in your food or your drink. Amazing how that happens, right? But there are some that are even in the world today. Things like spider venom, neurotoxins from snakes, the mambas, most venomous snakes on earth, unless you count the sea snake. The sea snake is actually the quite deadliest in the water, never leaves the water. But yet, the cobra is said to be the most venomous. Ironic, because the mamba blend in with the vegetation, just like the diamondback rattlesnake of North America. It's hostile, it's persistent, its venom is highly potent, but yet you can utilize all of this stuff, plants, trees, venoms, poisons, gases, and utilize it within shamanism, not just necromancy. It is said that to utilize drugs of some sort gives a state of falsicity within the perception of the third eye or that of the spiritual awakening, which is why so many put the emphasis on meditation, breathing exercises, mantras, but they forget the old ways and how these played into a huge, huge effect in the world. I mean, we look today where there's so many legal laws against a lot of these things. Some were so potent and so highly used, like the suicide tree. The medical professionals literally don't even consider it because it was so highly used back in the 18th century and early 19th century as a way to terminate life. But today, you have all these laws where you can be arrested depending on the quantity that you're caught with. I mean, marijuana, for an example, is legal in the US. Even in the state I'm in now, it's considered legal, but yet, depending on the quantity, you're allowed to have, what is it, 9 to 12 trees, I think, if I remember correctly, just of the pot plant. Hmm. Ironic. But yet, if you're out in public, you have to have it in a prescription bottle. Now, if you just take it out of a bag and just light up, guess what? That's drug dealing, and you can be arrested for it. So you see the point there. It's duality. Kind of like having all these laws protecting corpses, but yet cannibalism is legal. Ironic, right? Now, what did I say about black shamanism, or I should say dark shamanism? Dark shamanism, the consumption of human victims. I find it ironic because it's considered the victims are brutally ravaged, almost like a shark frenzy, if you think about it. You put that chum in the water, they go nuts over the scent of the blood. It's called a bloodlust. Wolves will just track you wherever you go. Now, sharks, they're cold-blooded. They're only in it for the feasting. Same thing when you get into shamanism. Some of these groups that go back to the 13th century, to Genghis Khan, for an example, or that of the guerrillas of Haitian Voodoo, they utilized herbalism heavily. They utilized it and forged it into a weapon that was placed upon their enemies. And they feared this group. So they outlawed it. And I find it interesting because when Buddhism arose, they started limiting shamanism. So they went to war with it. But it wasn't until the Soviet Empire went into Siberia and Mongolia that legal laws were put in place outlawing any dealing with it. Kind of sounds like what Christianity did, didn't it? Think about that for just a minute. Here's an introduction. Oh, look, that's called idol worship. It's now considered illegal. It's our way or execution. How many times have you seen this throughout history? From the Roman Empire going into the Gaelic traditions, wiping out the Druids because they knew that they could not defeat the people because of their belief in the Druids and how victorious they would be. They became so formidable, even the legions of the Roman Empire feared them. So they distracted them and sent a unit to kill the Druids. Then we see another one, another variation in Slavic traditions. Slavic traditions. They went after, instead of going in and slaughtering the people, no, this time around, they utilized psychological. They went after the hearts and minds of the people, which is why you have two different traditions, the neo-paganism and that of the heavily influenced Christianized population. But wait, let's go take it even further. But instead, let's go forward a little bit. The Knights of Templar. They worshipped Baphomet. They were known as the protectors of the people. They became so wealthy, they became a threat to the Vatican. The Vatican. So they became outlawed. Their ranks and their names were branded as outlaws. And they were hunted down and killed. Huh. I guess history doesn't teach this stuff anymore, do they? Which is why it's important to go back throughout history, throughout mythology, throughout the folklores and the actual practices worldwide to actually learn what happens and what happened. What was this practice used to be like? The druid versus the Durak, the witch versus the warlock, the Hugan or Mamba, the witch doctor, medicine man of Africa versus the Boko. Mm. You see a history here, don't you? A pattern. White light versus dark. But yet, we see point blank in this rich history that the black shamans were given a choice. They could serve good or they could serve evil. But yet, we also see a fact that some, depending on the region of the world, utilized both aspects of good and evil. They could heal and they could kill. Kind of like Hans Holzer's definition of a warlock out of the book Witches. Ironic how that goes, isn't it? But just think about all this for a reason. Just think about this. Herbalism, shamanism, necromancy, the occult community. Anyone who actually knows what they're doing is shunned or talked smack about, right? Huh. Ironic how that happens. Satan is the bad guy, right? And if you're not of the church, well, you're evil. Think about that. Shamanism is one of the oldest known traditions and practices worldwide outside of necromancy. Why? Because their practices work. But I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up your skirts. I want you to do your own homework into this. Type in dark shamanism. Look into shamanism of Mongolia or Siberia, perhaps even Brazilian shamanism. Look at shamanism of Peru or that of Colombia, Central America. What about European shamanism? Huh. So many traditions. I have a friend who's a shaman. He's an herbalist. Does live videos on YouTube. He's also a fellow admin in a group that I'm in. Hell of a guy. He knows just about as much as I do when it comes to this type of stuff. Most likely a lot more than me. But he's only revealed a certain amount, so it's kind of hard to tell. But the fact that he actually walks that tradition, well, that's his tradition. So obviously he's going to know more. That's just common sense. Sorcerer. As Bruja Louise so colorfully pointed out to me, I'm just an occultist. Gotta love that guy. Good friend and brother, about 5 hours away from where I'm at. One thing I like about him, he may come from a hereditary family line of Brujeria practices, but he's brutally honest. And he's right. I am an occultist. I study multiple different paths and I walk multiple different paths. But I'm loyal to what I am and what I do. How many of you can say the same? But for now, I just wanted to put this out there. I wanted you to see shamanism in the old world. I wanted you to, well, let's just say I wanted to whet your appetites in this case, and I wanted to whet it just enough that you go out and do your own research throughout history to look into mythology and practices, see where it leads you. And I even gave you one book by Neil Whitehead and Robin White so that you can go out and do it. Check them out. That book, that PDF that I got, I would love to get my hands on a book. Now, I found it on Amazon for about $26 and some odd cents. I'll get it tomorrow when I get paid. I look forward to getting it in paperback, maybe even if I can get it into hardcover. It's going to be awesome. But herbalism, shamanism, necromancy, they're the oldest known traditions outside of alchemy. Do your homework. Do it for yourself, not because somebody else told you to. Have a good one.